Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 20. I can't believe we're at 20 episodes of Friday Book Bites. And I am thrilled today to be joined by author Frances Chapman. Hi, Frances. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, everyone. I'm stoked to be here. It's really exciting.
It's a real thrill to have you here because you are my first young adult author that I have had on Friday Book Bites. So I'm really excited to chat with you. Before we get into that, though, I'm just going to pop up the details of the giveaway that we're having. And if anyone makes a comment or asks a question, whether it's here during the live stream or if you're watching this back up until midday Saturday Sydney time, you will go into the draw to win a copy of Frances's book, Stars Like Us, this shiny copy right here. So let's get into it, Frances. Because you are my first YA author, the most obvious question that I'm going to ask you, I guess, is when you're writing for a young adult audience, are there any special considerations that you have to take into account?
Yeah, so initially I thought no, and I wrote a book that I thought I would have loved as a teenager, and that's what Stars Like Us initially was this manuscript, like this idea that I wanted to write something that I would have loved and that I felt like I didn't have when I was growing up. And so I kind of wrote that story, and then I tried to get it published, and that took quite a long time, and I shipped it around to a bunch of different agents and publishers and entered some competitions and that sort of thing, and no one really wanted it. I was kind of like, this is weird. Like, I think this is so great. Like, why doesn't anyone want my wonderful book? So, which is
all been there.
We've all familiar story for everybody. But yeah, so then I eventually entered the Ampersand Prize, and was fortunate enough to win in 2018, which was amazing. But part of the prize is publication, and what is amazing about that prize is that the Hardy Grant Egmont, which is my publisher, works with you to get the book ready for publication. So they're happy to take a manuscript that isn't quite ready, which they're expecting it to not be ready, Yeah. So part of that process was them kind of saying, look, there's some stuff in this book that we don't really think is going to work with a teenage audience. And I was a bit surprised by that because I, as an adult, was, sort of thought, oh, this is going to be, great with this. So I don't know if there's necessarily things that you would like that you have to take out. Like, I don't know if there's necessarily rules, but maybe it's about the treatment of some certain subject matter. And also perhaps like, I feel like some teenagers can be quite, have quite strong values around right and wrong, and and so you want to make sure that your book is aligning with those, and that you're not having characters who are like, for example, I had a main character in my book who cheated on his girlfriend. This was something that the publisher felt was probably like, if you want this character to be likable, he really shouldn't cheat on his girlfriend for a teenage audience. Whereas I think perhaps adults might be a bit more forgiving of that kind of, oh, people are different, and sometimes things happen, and right. That was their view. So there was things like that. There was a lot of drug use in the original version, which I mostly removed because the publisher felt that sort of needed to be toned down a little bit. That's not to say that all young adult books cannot contain any drug use at all, but in this book, it was, so when we discussed it, it sort of felt like it wasn't working that well. Or maybe it was my treatment of it as quite sort of cavalier. And I mean, my book is set in, in the music industry, and, rock and roll. So realistically, I thought, oh, there will be some drug taking in this. But when we actually kind of sat down with it, it was like, yeah, like, do they need to be having so much cocaine? So, yeah, so it's interesting, these considerations. I guess that, like, if you were an aspiring YA author, if you're writing YA and you're wondering about whether there's things that you cannot use, I would read a lot of YA, like read what's out there on the shelves, and then you can kind of see the treatment of these things and work out where your book might fit among those different topics. Like, I don't know if I would say that there are rules around like what you can and can't include, so much as like thinking about, what's out there already, like how comfortable are publishers with these kind of ideas, and teenagers as well, like what's going to sort of tie in with what they want. Yeah, it was a bit of a journey for me, because I had sort of cavalierly waded in going, yeah, it'll be fine. And it turned out that it sort of wasn't. So
yeah, I'm fascinated by that because I have a 14-year-old daughter, and the fact that you said there are certain things like, you know, the cheating on the girlfriend would be no, and I just thought they're much more aware of things these days than they were teenagers when I was a teenager, and I'm a fair bit older than you, Frances, so we're going back a fair bit now in time. You know, what my daughter knows and understands about the world and the way the world works is far beyond anything I did at that age. So I guess I'm a little bit surprised that they thought that the teenagers wouldn't cope with that sort of thing.
And I don't know how much it's the publisher just being very anxious about it, and how much of it is because what you're essentially dealing with there is like the middleman. So your book won't get published if you maybe like they would not have published my book if I hadn't made these changes, right? But yep. I don't know how much of that was their call, kind of going, oh well, you know, we don't want to be seen to be condoning drug use or whatever it was, and how much of it was teenagers can't cope with this. Because I agree with you. Like, I've got teenagers in my life as well, and every teenager who's come up, you know, as a result of reading this book has, you know, there's you sort of speak to them, and I don't remember being nearly as, you know, intelligent or articulate or you know, expressive or and their worldview at the, you know, understanding of sort of big topics is just way beyond what mine was at that age. So I don't know if I was particularly, like, I grew up in rural Tasmania, so it's, you know, a different kind of setting back then, but still, like, it's interesting. I don't know. I'm interested to know if I gave my original manuscript to a teenager now, like, if they would really dig it maybe and be like, yeah, you should have left all the drugs in, you know, or the cheating. Like that particular episode with the cheating on the girlfriend thing was, I was trying to sort of, you know, when I was a teenager, I was making lots of mistakes and I was like very impulsive, and that was the kind of character that I was creating there. And so I thought, oh, well, that will resonate with, I thought that would resonate with teenagers. But the impulsivity wasn't the thing that the publisher focused on. It was the cheating. They were kind of like, oh, that can't stand. So, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, like, and also you know, different publishers would have different perspectives on this, sure. Probably. Perhaps also different markets. Like if you're looking at America or England, they may have they've got a bigger audience there, so they might be less cautious. I don't know, but yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting to me how much, like, not that my whole, you know, the whole book didn't change, or like it wasn't that different, and there are things about, you know, my book still has a substantial amount of sex in it, and but it's not very graphic. So I guess it's sort of, yeah, it's interesting to consider the readership.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you mentioned about, you know, what would happen if you gave your original manuscript to a teenager to read. As an author for adults, I have what we call beta readers. So I have people who will read my manuscript, you know, and they're kind of my target audience, you know, middle-aged women like myself, to give me feedback. Did you ever think about doing that with yours? Because obviously you can give it to other writers, but we're going to look at it from a writer's point of view, whereas getting a teenager's viewpoint would be very different, I think.
Yeah, I did. So I gave it to a few teenagers that I know, so a few people who I know who have daughters, particularly in that age range. I also got because it's got a lot of music stuff in it. My cousin's a bit of a rock star, and I got him to read it. And I also got a contact of mine who I met through a friend who's both a teenager and a guitarist. So I got a perspective from those two people. And I also got, I had a child and adolescent psychologist read it to sort of thinking about like the insight into the teenage mind and themes and that kind of thing. I mean, I think in that, like, you can probably have too many people reading as well, and teenagers are utterly brutal. So like, some of the feedback was like, one guy was like, what did he call it? It wasn't schmaltzy. It was something like that. Sappy. He said it was sappy. Yeah. And I was like, oh, no. And then he's like, oh, no, I really liked it. It was just like that word. I was like, oh, that's not what I'm going for, you know. But he was like, no, I really liked it. Yeah, it's fine. So they just tell you what you think, what they think, which is fantastic, because that's what you want to hear. You know, you want the truth in those moments, don't you? But
yeah, in those moments you do, but when you're living with a teenager, there are some moments you don't want their honesty. My daughter can be harsh, like really, really harsh.
It's brutal.
Yep, I'm surprised I'm still here, to be honest. Now, Tracy's made a comment, because you mentioned that you grew up in Tasmania, I think you said, was it?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Yeah, so Tracy grew up in the 70s and 80s in Sydney's western suburbs,
right.
and even she was more innocent back then than the kids are today. So
Yeah,
I think it's kind of the times rather than a location.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the especially pre-internet, like, well, I mean, I had the internet growing up, but it was, you know, very slow, and it would dial up and make like gurgle, you know. And we had a limit, like in my family, we had a limit on, I think it was 6 hours a month, and I had to log it, because obviously you're paying by the hour at that time. You know, it was like, so I had to log it every time I logged on, and I would, like my stepdad's computer, I would like sit down and it would be like 7:27 or something, and I would say that it was 7:29, and I would just get my extra couple of minutes every time. So because of that, you know, you're not on the internet all the time. You're not exposed. There's no sort of social networking at that point. So there was no Twitter. There's no Facebook, or you're not really being exposed to other ideas from the other side of the world. Like the idea of something like the Black Lives Matter protests, like the way that took off, that would never have happened when I was growing up in the early 2000s, because it's just not like there was just no connection in that way. You have these isolated movements happening, but the idea of a big cohesive movement across the world is just like blows me away. And so you can see how kids being so connected are able to kind of form these really, you know, intelligent, like highly developed ideas around complicated concepts. But I was still like, you know, like just trying to, like, you know, in my own school, within different cliques, trying to work out where did I fit in there, let alone within a wider world. So, yeah, it is really different.
It is, and I'm the same as Tracy. I'm a child of the 70s and 80s, and I mean, the internet didn't exist then. You know, it wasn't until I got to university that we started using the web, and so it's a very, very different world that the children are growing up in these days, which, you know, as a parent can be quite frightening.
Yeah, terrible.
It really, really is. Leanne's got a question here, and we haven't answered it yet, Leanne. What age group would you recommend reading your book, Frances?
Yeah, I've got one too. I'll hold it up like this so you can see. I would recommend 12 to 15-year-olds, girls probably. The main character is a girl, so that at that age group, kids can be a bit tribal along gender lines. Having said that, I know a few boys who've also read it and enjoyed it. If you like YA, a lot of adults like YA. YA is the genre that I prefer to read as well, and I'm not a teenager. If you're an adult and you like YA, you may also enjoy my book. It's very light, like it's a real fantasy kind of romp through this music industry, like rock band kind of milieu. I like to describe it as walk the line for a teenage girl protagonist, with a sort of it's got lots of it's got a queer love triangle. It's got a lot of musical, like conversations around integrity versus commercialization and those kind of things, but they're dealt with in a really light, fun way. I think it's an easy read. So so hopefully some adults will also enjoy it, but it is aimed at 12 to 15-year-olds.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that. Tracy's just mentioning that she loves YA, and Tracy's the same age as me. So, and we're going to come back to genres and how they're marketed in just a moment. But on the back of Leanne's question when she asked about what age group it's for, something I read or heard somewhere along the line in my journey is that children are aspirational readers. You know, a 10-year-old doesn't want to read about a 10-year-old. They want to read about a 12 or 13-year-old because that's where they're headed in life. Is that what you found?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm told that in YA as well, particularly. So my main character is 16, and I think that she's pitched to be a little bit aspirational for a 12 to 15-year-old reader. So when I say there's a lot of sex in it, I'm not talking about 12 to 15-year-olds having sex. And it's not, I shouldn't oversell this. I just think that it's all dealt with quite not, I wouldn't say conservatively, but it's more implied than graphic, I guess. So I guess that's the other thing about the readership is perhaps if you had a YA book for an older readership, like a 16 to 18-year-old, you may be able to deal with some of those themes in a little bit of a more explicit way, I guess. But I hope I haven't missold it. There's some reviews on the internet if you're interested. You could probably Google it and have a look and see if it sounds like the sort of thing your kids would like.
Yeah, Jodie's got children right in the right age group for it, 12 and 15, and the 15-year-old is a musician. So it might be right up their alley.
I hope that she finds it accurate. I unfortunately am not a musician, but I always wanted to be. I feel as a kid I was quite introverted, and I used to go and watch lots of boys in bands, which was sort of the thing that happened in the 90s and 2000s. And if I had the courage, I would have picked up a guitar. And so that's kind of what I wrote, was a guitarist main character with a lot of confidence and chutzpah that I lacked.
I think all of us at one point wanted to be a rock star. Unfortunately, most of us don't have the talent.
Yeah, me too.
Cannot hold a tune. We spoke about how a lot of adults like reading YA novels, and Tracy's there, and you only have to see the success of franchises like the Divergent series, or any of those, even Harry Potter, I guess, that a lot of adults read those sorts of books there as well. Now, from a book selling perspective, from a publisher's perspective, a bookshop's perspective, we have to have genres because that's how they market it to people. But when we get so stuck in those genres, we can run into some problems. And it's something that both you and I feel really strongly about. And that is what we call genre snobs. So people, I would never read a YA novel because I'm a grown-up. I write women's fiction, and there's a lot of people that won't read women's fiction because it's not literary enough. Can you give me a little insight into how you feel about that kind of thinking?
Oh, I hate it. So I feel like, I also think that, so I feel like the hardest thing for me as a writer is keeping the reader, right? Like that's, and you want someone to keep turning the pages. They want you to have to keep reading, and you want them to finish your book. And that's your big challenge as a writer. So if you can do that effectively, you get dismissed as an easy read, or you'll knock it over in a minute. You know what I mean? And it's like, that sort of suggests that it's really shallow and there's no depth to it. But the truth is that if you can do that, you're actually, like, as a writer, you're actually kicking goals. Like, that is your number one priority. And so I think, I really dislike it when there's this kind of implication that, there are books that win prizes, as in the good books, and then there are the other books that people actually read. It's taken me a long time to realise that I don't really like literary fiction. It's just, I find, unless it's quite plot driven, I find it easy to put down. I find it sometimes quite dull. Sometimes it's rewarding if, you persevere with it, but I don't know if that's not really why I read. I read to be entertained. I love, getting connected with new characters and settings and places, and just kind of immersing myself in that world for a couple of days. And as a parent as well, like, I'm pretty busy, and if I'm going to be reading, it needs to be something that will really hook me. And as someone I've been writing for a long time and was not getting published. And that's the hardest thing, is trying to hook someone and making it hard for someone to put it down. So I don't like that snobbery. I think there's room for lots of people, different kind of genres in the world, and I think that's fine if people want to write it, or read it. But the idea that what I write is not as good because it was easy to read is a bit offensive. Like, it's like, do you know how hard it was to write? It might be easy to read, but it's hard to write.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, they'll say, oh, I knocked it over in a day, and you're like, it took me 4 years to write.
Yeah. Well, if someone knocks it over in the day, that's the highest compliment, right? Like, I've had a number of kids say to me, or parents particularly say to me, oh, I gave your book to my son, and he never reads anything, and he couldn't put it down. And I'm like, well, that is brilliant, like, because if you get, particularly teenagers, like, they've got so many other things they could be doing. It's quite a compliment if they'll sit down with your book for 24 hours and spend some time in the world that you made up. But I mean, I think women's fiction is particularly, like, you must find exactly the same, like, particularly dismissed sometimes, as most things for women are, with this kind of
yes.
And it's like, well, like, it should just really be just fiction. Like, we're 50% of the population. Like, there's quite a market for it, right?
Yeah, there is, and women are the bulk of the buying public when it comes to fiction. Look, I've certainly been dismissed, more than a few times, and in a few different ways. And one of the things that really got my goat once was an aspiring writer who said in front of me, I don't want to write commercial fiction because I want to write something that matters, that means something.
Yeah, cool.
And I, we're very lucky there wasn't bloodshed that day, because it's that notion that it's not worthy. And, when I get emails from readers who say, I had a stroke 18 months ago and I haven't been able to read a book in that time because I've got cognitive issues. Yours is the first book that I've managed to finish. You can't tell me that book didn't mean something to that reader. I'm never going to win a prize, but to say it's not me, people, it's really, it's just this bizarre way of thinking. And but the thing I've come to realize is people who are like that, people who dismiss a genre, it's different to not liking a genre. We all have different tastes. We all have things that we enjoy. But to dismiss a genre as not worthy, I think they've completely missed the point of literature. Literature should reflect the human condition in every single one of its forms. And that means a young adult novel about a band, or a women's fiction novel about a beachside community, or an existential crisis novel, the gritty underside of Sydney. It's all of those things. And if you dismiss any one of those genres, you've dismissed humanity, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I mean, like, fundamentally, I read to be entertained. So I think that you've got, like, obviously, it's great to learn, it's great to grow, and it's great to, understand humanity suddenly or whatever. But also, I just want a really great story. Like, and I feel like that was my challenge for this book, is that I wanted to write something that was, a great story, and I wanted to write the kind of story that I wanted to read as a kid, as a teenager. So I think, like, ultimately that's what we are as, humans, as animals. We're very drawn to stories and different, like, ways of understanding ourselves, and seeing ourselves reflected and so on. And there's room, as you say, there's room for all different ways of doing that, So yeah, I don't like the snob. I agree with you. Like, I sometimes read things that are quite literary, like, and sometimes very much enjoy them. But I also like to have the thing that's, kind of page turny.
Yeah, and sometimes it could be the mood that you're in as well.
Definitely.
Yvonne here says that she's tried the literary prize-winning novels and she doesn't like them, and she's not so into sci-fi or fantasy. And as I said, not liking a genre is one thing. I don't like pumpkin soup. I'm sure that there are plenty of people
don't like pumpkin soup. It's terrible.
Thank you. People down to that. It's a matter of taste, and that's a different thing. We all have our favourite genres to read and genres we're not so keen on, but that's a very different thing to looking down on a genre, I think. And everything has its place. I think of comic strips, they have their place. Looking at Batman versus Superman, you're still delving into that human connection, good versus evil. It's just in a different medium, and it's going to appeal to different people.
Definitely. My dad last year bought me all the Booker Prize shortlisted novels. So I got 6 for Christmas. I got 6 books, and they were all, he went to it was lovely, like it's very thoughtful of him. He went to the bookshop and he asked the person there to, what had been shortlisted for the Booker this year. And then he's like, you're a writer, here. Yeah, 6 books. One of them is basically a single sentence that goes over probably 900 pages.
One sentence?
It's called Ducks Newburyport, and it is full on. Like, I would say unreadable, but obviously some people have read it because it made it to the shortlist. I was just like, this is intense. Like, please just give me something with a story and some full stops.
But again, that is, that particular book is another aspect of the human condition and has its place within that world, but isn't going to be everybody, obviously. And
so obviously some people liked it.
Absolutely. And Liz has left us a comment saying that fiction means a lot to readers like her, so they can escape from the everyday and enjoy some time out. And that's exactly what you were saying about why you read.
That's what I do. Yeah, I like to escape, and I really like to I like a coming of age story. I like to feel at the end of it that and that's what YA is essentially. Like, that's why many adults enjoy it, is that it's essentially a story of a teenager finding their identity in themselves, and they start off often uncertain about who they are, and by the end of the book hopefully they've grown and matured, and that's that's a valuable story. It's an important story. And I think as a the books that have really resonated with me and stayed with me, I think about when I was a teenager, I read the Tomorrow When the War Began series, and it was very influential on me. Now it's probably quite dated, those books. I haven't revisited them, and I'm not sure that they would stand up. Maybe they would. I'm just not sure. There's a lot of new things out there too. But like something like that, really, you sort of felt like, if there was a war, that's what I would be like. I would be strong too. I'd fight, and I'd, defend my country, and I'd be with my friends, and and then at the end of it, you're kind of more of an adult than a child. And that's what YA, I think, is to a lot of people. So yeah, I agree with you, Liz. I think it's about escaping from the everyday and just taking some time out, really.
Particularly in this day and age, I think, at the moment. Cheryl has said she's broadened her genres from women's fiction to include crime and mystery and magic realism and historical, and she's so glad that she did. And these are the genres that are often looked down upon. So it's great that they're...
So historical also, I did history at university, and I particularly love a story that I feel really evokes a time that I didn't live through. I love that too, Cheryl. Historical fiction's the best.
Absolutely. And as Leanne puts it so simply, we can't please everyone. So,
that's true.
That's absolutely true. And Tracy's got a point here that she almost exclusively started out reading romance, which has long been looked down upon. It probably gets the worst rap out of all the genres, I think. And as she's grown older, her tastes have changed. That's an interesting point. I'll address the romance first. Yeah, it is something that gets poo-pooed a lot. But at the end of the day, don't we all just want to be loved? As people?
Yeah, and I think, that's also, again, shows you a way of, a character growing and changing and becoming who they are. And like, my book is essentially a romance in some ways, or a love triangle. And that's, I think, what the teenager who described it as sappy was probably responding to. But I'm very driven by that. I love a love story, and I love going, when I go to the movies, I'm always searching for the romantic aspect of the story. So that's something I connect with personally, and I think readers will too. So
absolutely. And the second part of Tracy's comment, that as she's grown, her tastes have changed, and I think that's really true. So the guy that read your book and said it was sappy, that's reflective of the stage of life that he is in at the moment. If we visit him in another 10 or 15 years time, he might have a slightly different view of those sorts of things.
Well, I don't think he didn't like it, but I think he was like, oh, it's for girls. So, it's pink. The cover is very pink. And it's true, it is. So, you know, I mean, I wasn't offended by that. I thought, you know, because his dad was telling me about it, and I was like, well, he's reading it. So, you know, he's still reading it. So you got to just take that.
And when we're talking about children, you know, as long as they're reading, that's all that matters, right? It doesn't matter what it is that they're reading.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, Frances, what is next for you? I'm going to pop up your website and social media details so that if people want to find you, they can. What's next in your world?
So I am working on a very, very early stages of a new book. It is a ghost story. So it's something different from me. My first book is not at all magical, and I mean, this isn't really magical, but you know, ghosts are a new thing for me. It's not a horror story, more of a romance, I think, between a ghost and a living person. But I know, but I'm really feeling my way with it at the moment. I've written probably 7,000 words, really early stages, so that's consuming a lot of my waking hours at the moment, and I'm staring off into space and trying to work out how it's all going to work. But I'm pretty excited about it. I think it's going to be a good one. So stay tuned. Probably a couple of years.
You're at that stage where it's new and it's exciting, but it's also scary because you're not quite sure where it's going, right?
There's so many unknowns. I mean, like, really all I can say about it at this stage is that there is a ghost and there is a main character who is not a ghost, and that's all I got. But
Excellent. So, as I said, there is a chance to win a copy of Frances's book, Stars Like Us. I think my daughter would probably enjoy it. I think I would enjoy it, actually, which is fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me, Frances, and being my first young adult author on Friday Book Bites.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. It's been so lovely chatting to you.
It's a wonderful thing just talking about any kind of books. You know, I could talk all day about books with book people, and it's been an absolute pleasure. So have a wonderful weekend to you and to everyone else, and we will see each other around the traps in the next coming week or so. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.